Welcome to the Bovine Podcast, where we cut through the dairy industry's noise to deliver the unfiltered truth. Today, we're tackling the billion-dollar question: should your dairy grow its own grain or stick to milking cows? New research from Penn State reveals a shocking 15% energy savings for farms that grow their feed, but equipment dealers won't tell you about the $500,000 price tag or the 15-year payback period. We'll dissect the brutal economics, expose the hidden risks for high-producing herds, and share real-world case studies from dairies that made grain work and those that went bankrupt trying. Stick around to hear why a 650-cow New York operation calls grain their secret profit center, while a Wisconsin farmer says, "Growing corn nearly sunk us." Plus, we'll give you a step-by-step tool to decide if this gamble could save or sink your dairy. No BS. Just the facts you need. Let's dig in.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive, where we try to wade through all the information out there for you. Today, we're tackling a question that, well, it's probably popped up a few times lately. Should your dairy get into growing its own grain? Is, a smart move for the bottom line, maybe even energy independence? Or is it a risky detour?
Yeah, that's really the core issue, isn't it? We've got some fascinating stuff here. Research pointing one way, hard economics pointing another. It's definitely not a simple yes or no answer you might get from, say, your nutritionist or banker. We're going deeper.
Exactly. I mean, on one hand, you hear about this Penn State research showing some, frankly, pretty surprising energy savings, like up to 15% for farms growing their own feed. That sounds great. But then you look at the price tag on a combine.
Right. Suddenly that 15% feels a bit different.
Yeah.
So that's the real tension here. Our mission today is to unpack all of this, the research, the costs, the real world stuff, and give you a clear picture of when growing grain might make sense for a dairy and, well, when it probably doesn't.
And it seems like good timing, too. Our sources say there's a definite upswing in interest in this idea across different dairy regions.
There really is. And it's not just out of the blue. Farmers are looking hard at feed costs, thinking about, supply chain security after the last few years. And that flexibility, being able to use land for grain or forage, that's definitely appealing, too.
Absolutely. That control factor is tempting. But like our sources say, you really got to evaluate your own situation carefully before jumping in. So, okay, let's start with this shocking energy advantage the Penn State research found. Tell us about that.
Right. So the good news, as one source puts it, they found Northeast dairy farms growing their own grain could cut fossil energy inputs by, up to 15% compared to farms importing all their feed. They compared farms, same herd size, same milk output, but different levels of feed self-sufficiency. And the ones doing both forage and grain on farms saw that 15% drop in energy per turn of milk.
Okay, 15%. That's not small potatoes. So where's that saving coming from? Magic.
Not quite magic. It's mostly about importing way less feed, 71% less in the study. Think about it. Growing feed, say, in the Midwest, often relies heavily on synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. Making those fertilizers, that takes a lot of energy.
Right, it's not free energy baked into the fertilizer bag.
Exactly, but when you grow grain on farm, you can leverage your own resources better. Manure becomes a key nutrient source. Legumes in the rotation help fix nitrogen naturally. The Penn State team actually saw nitrogen inputs were 4 times higher for the imported corn compared to their trial farm using manure and legumes.
4 times? Wow, that's a huge difference.
It really is. And it's not just Penn State saying this. Research out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison backs it up. They found integrated crop livestock systems could cut purchase fertilizer needs by up to 80%. 80. And their long-term trials showed diverse rotations could keep yields up while cutting input costs, maybe $40 to $70 an acre compared to continuous corn.
Okay, so the energy efficiency side looks, pretty compelling on paper. Less fertilizer, less transport. But let's bring it back to the farm level, that 15% overall energy saving.
Yeah.
How does that line up with where a dairy actually uses energy day to day? What are the big hogs on the power bill?
That's a really important connection to make.
Yeah.
NY Sorta report, that's the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, broke it down. Ventilation, big one, about 25%. Lighting, close behind at 24%. Milk cooling, 22%. Vacuum pumps, 17%. Then you get down to manure handling, water heating. Those are around 4% each. And actual feeding equipment, only about 3%.
3%. Wow, okay. So the energy saved by growing grain is mostly before it even gets to your farm gate in the production and transport. But the big energy users on the farm, fans, lights, cooling, aren't directly changed by where the grain comes from.
Precisely. That 15% reduction is significant environmentally, for sure, but it doesn't mean your farm's electricity bill will suddenly drop by 15%. The savings are mainly upstream. It's a critical distinction when you're thinking about your farm's direct operating costs.
Right. Okay, so the energy piece is complex. That leads us to this fundamental point the sources kept hitting. Milk comes first. Sounds obvious, maybe.
It sounds obvious, but it's easy to lose sight of. You're a dairy farmer. Your main job, your core business, is making milk efficiently. Everything else should support that. So the question is, does adding a whole grain enterprise truly help you make milk better or more profitably? Or does it pull resources, your time, your people's time, your capital, away from the cows?
Yeah, I can see that. Especially where high-quality forage is king. You wouldn't want to compromise your haylage quality because you're stretched too thin trying to manage grain crops, too.
Exactly. You need to be honest. Do you have the land, the time, the labor to add grain acres without messing up your forage planting and harvesting schedule? If things are already tight, adding another big job could cause problems everywhere.
Right, can't chase the grain dream while the forage harvester sits idle or the cows are waiting. Okay, this leads us straight into the scary part for many. Equipment costs. This isn't just about buying a bit more seed, is it?
Not even close. Forget just seed, fertilizer, herbicide costs. You're talking major capital, specialized stuff, combines, grain planters, drills. They're not cheap. You need storage bins, maybe dryers, and you need people to run it all. More labor.
And the land itself. If you put 200 acres into corn for grain, that's 200 acres not growing forage, or maybe not rented out. That's a real cost, the opportunity cost.
Absolutely. So yeah, the energy savings are nice to talk about, but the economics, way more complicated. The sources suggest that often growing your own grain only really pencils out financially when commodity prices are high. When they drop, you might wish you'd just bought it.
It really makes you ask, if I have, say, $500,000 to invest, where does it make the biggest impact? A new combine? Or maybe better bedding or parlor upgrades?
That's exactly the critical question. Okay, let's dive into some of those numbers. University of Minnesota Extension laid out some typical costs. A new combine.
Yeah, I saw that. $300,000 up to $500,000.
Yeah.
And depreciating $20K to $50K a year. Ouch.
And that's just the combine. A corn planter, $80,000 to $150,000. Grain drill, maybe $40K to $80K. Then storage bins priced per bushel, maybe $1.80 to $2.50 a bushel capacity. Handling gear, augers, conveyors, another $25K to $80K. And maybe a dryer, $40,000 to $150,000 there too.
So for a medium dairy, maybe 150, 300 cows trying to grow even just half their grain, you could easily be looking at over $500,000 in capital. And that's before fuel, maintenance, labor.
Exactly. It adds up incredibly fast. And this ties into that Penn State Extension warning about false efficiency. You think you're saving energy or being self-sufficient, but you create this huge financial burden with the equipment, maybe straining other parts of the operation. Grain growing can definitely fall into that trap.
Okay, so you bite the bullet, you buy the iron. When does it actually start paying you back? Cornell looked at this break-even stuff, right? And it varies a lot.
Hello, hugely. Depends on your farm size, what equipment you might already have, and crucially, what grain prices are doing. For a smaller place, maybe 50, 100 acres of grain. Cornell figured the break-even corn price might need to be $5.80 to $7.25 a bushel.
Yeah.
And the payback could be 15 plus years if you bought all new gear. 15 years.
15 years. Wow, that's a long horizon. Does it get better for bigger farms?
Yeah, it does improve with scale. Medium farms, say 100, 250 acres of grain, maybe break even is $4.75 to $5.60 corn. Payback might drop to 8 to 12 years, get up to 250 plus acres. Break even could be $4.10 to $4.80, and maybe you see a positive ROI in 5 to 8 years. Scale is definitely key.
Right, and these numbers assume buying everything new. If you've already got some gear or use the custom operators, it could look better.
For sure. If you can use existing planters or drills or rely on custom harvesting, that cuts the upfront investment significantly. But you still have storage costs, handling costs, and with custom guys, you're relying on their schedule. Can they be there exactly when you need them? That's a risk too.
This whole thing just screams opportunity cost, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you have that capital, is grain gear the best use for it on a dairy?
That is the million-dollar question. Exactly. Limited capital. Where does it give you the best return for improving milk production, your core business? Is it the combine? Or is it new free stalls, better ventilation, a more efficient parlor? Things that directly touch the cows in the milk check.
That NYSERDA energy pyramid idea seems relevant here. Analyze first, then efficiency upgrades, then big capital projects.
Makes total sense. Go for the low-hanging fruit first. Better bedding, improved ventilation, those investments directly impact cow health and production. Money tied up in a grain drill isn't directly making your cows more comfortable or productive.
And the example they gave of variable speed drive on a vacuum pump saves significant energy, potentially pays back much faster than a whole grain enterprise.
Exactly. Those targeted efficiency gains within the dairy itself often offer quicker, more certain returns than launching a whole new farming venture.
Okay, let's switch focus to the cows themselves. High-producing herds and homegrown grain. The sources suggest that can be tricky. It's not just about growing it cheaply.
No, definitely not. Think about commercial grain suppliers. They blend grain from lots of sources. That gives them incredible consistency in the nutritional profile. It also dilutes any potential issues, like mycotoxins, from one specific batch. Achieving that same consistency on farm with smaller batches is just harder.
And those high-end cows pushing 90, 100 pounds or more, they're sensitive, like that producer said. Even small energy swings in high-moisture corn can mess them up.
Totally. They have way less wiggle room nutritionally. And storage becomes absolutely critical. You can't just pile it in an old shed. You need proper drying, aeration, monitoring to prevent spoilage and quality loss. That loss is called shrink.
Shrink. Right. That's moisture loss, spoilage, pests. And the Wisconsin research said typical losses can be, 4% up to 15% for corn?
Yeah, depending on storage and management. Even a few percent shrink at today's prices adds up fast. It eats away at any savings you thought you had. So you need the capital for good storage, and you need the management time to actually keep that grain in top condition.
Okay, we've painted a challenging picture, but it's not impossible, right? The sources did mention some success stories. Dairies making it work. What's their secret?
Yeah, absolutely. There are successful examples. Michigan State research looked into this. One model is the large-scale integrated dairy. Like that 650 cow farm in New York, they farm 1,800 acres, over 1,000 of that in grain. A big part of their success is just scale. They can justify owning the big equipment, multiple combines, trucks, etc.
Makes sense. Economies of scale kick in. What else?
They have a dedicated grain management team, almost separate from the dairy side. It gets the focus it needs. They've invested in modern storage with monitoring. Their equipment is sized right, so grain harvest doesn't delay forage harvest. They use a specialized crop consultant. And crucially, they track grain as a separate profit center. That farmer said they treat it like its own business unit, comparing costs directly to market prices.
Right, treating it like a distinct business. Okay, what about the other example, the mid-size farm in PA? They had a different approach.
Yeah, the 320 cow dairy. Their success comes more from partnerships. They share equipment and expertise with neighboring grain farms. This avoids that massive upfront capital cost. They focus mainly on corn by other grains. They use custom harvesters, but have agreements that prioritize their timing.
So collaboration is key for them. What else works?
Flexibility. They can decide late in the season whether to chot a field for silage or harvest it for grain, depending on needs and conditions. That's huge. They also have relationships for emergency grain purchases if needed, and they do intensive soil testing to maximize manure nutrients. They figure their production costs are usually 15-20% below market, and that silage flexibility is a big win in dry years.
So clearly no single recipe for success. Scale helps, partnerships help, but both need serious management and planning. Now, you mentioned regional differences and maybe a research gap. That 15% energy saving in the Northeast, that might not apply everywhere.
Exactly. The Penn State study was, in Pennsylvania. A big chunk of their energy saving came from not trucking grain all the way from the Midwest. If you're already in the Midwest or another major grain area, that transportation energy saving disappears. Your potential advantage is much smaller, maybe zero.
Right, depends where you're starting from.
Yeah. And even Penn State noted that while their system using on-farm fuel production lowered energy inputs, it needed more land and might not actually save money at current fuel prices. Again, energy efficiency doesn't always equal economic efficiency. They aren't always the same thing.
Michigan State also compared specialized dairies versus diversified ones growing feed. What did they find?
It was interesting. They looked at about 246 farms. They found that under 500 acres, the farms specializing in milk production, buying most feed, actually had an 11% higher return on assets than the diversified farms growing lots of grain. But that advantage vanished for the really big farms, over 500 acres. Suggests that at large scale, the grain economics can work. But for smaller to mid-size, specialization often paid better.
So for many folks listening, focusing intensely on milk production might be the smarter financial play, according to that study. Okay, let's try to boil this down. When might growing grain actually make sense? What are the green lights?
Okay, based on everything, favorable conditions would include having significant excess land, truly beyond your forage needs. Already owning some key grain equipment helps a lot. Having management who actually knows grain farming or access to good specialists. Being located far from grain belts, like the Northeast example, where transport costs are high for purchased feed. Having the scale, maybe 2+ acres per cow to make equipment ownership viable. Having good modern storage or the capital to build it. And, having the right soil and climate. Plus, enough financial cushion to handle the learning curve, maybe some losses initially.
That's a solid checklist. Now, the flip side, what are the big red flags, the warning signs that say, danger, Will Robinson?
Big warning signs. If you're already struggling to make enough high-quality forage, if your team, equipment, labor, management is already stretched thin, if your focus is pushing really high production per cow, remember that sensitivity issue. If you're in a major grain region where it's cheap to buy locally, if investing in grain means not investing in cow comfort or crucial dairy facility upgrades, that's a huge red flag. Lack of good storage, always struggling to get fieldwork done on time, and, frankly, having limited financial reserves to handle a bad crop year or low prices.
It really forces an honest look in the mirror, doesn't it? At your resources, your skills, your farm's core strengths. Like the source said, success here isn't luck. It's about a clear-eyed assessment of your unique situation.
Exactly. Dr. Stevenson from Wisconsin, quoted in the source, summed it up well. The advantage varies hugely by size, management, region. He said the winners tend to be either intensely focused on milk or big enough to run both milk and grain effectively as separate, well-managed enterprises.
So those core questions keep coming back. Does this help my main mission making milk? Do I really have the capacity for this complexity? Where does my capital do the most good? Maybe for some, that 15% energy saving in the Northeast, if they have the scale and setup, aligns energy goals and economics. But for lots of others, focusing on the cows, optimizing that core dairy business is probably still the best bet. The truth isn't always convenient, as we like to say at the Bullvine.
That's spot on. And look, before you get serious, there are some pointed questions you absolutely need to ask specific people.
Right, like your equipment dealer. Don't just ask the price.
No way. Ask for the total annual cost of ownership, depreciation, maintenance, finance. Ask how many acres they think you really need to justify that machine. Ask about custom work options as an alternative. And crucially, what's their parts and service situation during harvest? Can they keep you running when time is critical?
Good ones. And your nutritionist.
You need a frank talk. What quality variations should you expect from homegrown grain? How will that impact your high producers? What testing should you plan on? What storage and processing methods did they recommend for your setup and your cows?
Okay. And definitely your financial advisor or lender.
Yeah. Compare this investment directly to other uses for that capital on the dairy side. Calculate your realistic break-even cost, all in. How does the extra debt affect your overall financial health, your flexibility, and what risk management tools, crop insurance, marketing strategies should you use for the grain side?
Okay, let's quickly recap the biggest takeaways then. 1, potential 15% energy savings in feed production, especially far from grain belts, but that doesn't always equal economic savings for the farm. 2, equipment costs are huge. $300K, $500K for just a combine needs scale. Payback can be very long, 15+ years for smaller farms. 3, successful integrated farms often have separate grain management, modern storage, and are either large-scale or use partnerships effectively. 4, high-producing herds are sensitive to grain quality variations. Specialized milk production is often more profitable under 500 acres. 5, use those checklists, favorable conditions versus warning signs to assess your own farm realistically.
Exactly, it's that trade-off. Energy potential versus financial risk and management complexity. Penn State showed the energy angle in one region, but economics depend on your scale, setup, management.
Yeah.
Success seems possible at 600+ cows with dedicated resources, but smaller farms face big hurdles with costs and ROI. It always comes back to, does grain growing advance or distract from making milk? Data often suggests specialization wins for dairies under 500 acres.
Well, that was certainly a deep dive into the grain growing question. Thanks for joining us as we sorted through the pros, cons, and complexities. It is definitely not a simple decision, and hopefully this conversation gave you some valuable things to think about for your own operation.
Yeah, we really hope so. We definitely encourage you to think about the points that hit home for you and talk them over with your own advisors, your lender, nutritionist, consultant. Consider this discussion just the start. It's a big strategic question for your dairy's future.
So after chewing on all this, are you leaning more towards the potential of homegrown grain? Or are you thinking it's better to double down on optimizing everything that goes into that bulk tank? The answer, as we've seen, is really unique to your farm's story. Until our next deep dive, keep farming smart.
If this episode made you rethink your feed strategy, hit subscribe and share it with a fellow dairy producer facing the same tough choices. For the full article, The Grain Gamble, including our exclusive decision checklist and equipment cost breakdown, visit thebulvine.com. Before we go, here's your takeaway. Growing grain isn't about pride, it's about profit. For some, it's a lifeline. For others, a distraction. Only your land, labor, and ledger can decide. Next week, we're exposing how carbon credits are paying dairies $1,200 per cow and why 80% of farmers are getting scammed. Until then, this is Hostname reminding you, in dairy, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. Innovate or evaporate.